Shaun, welcome to the Power Within You podcast. It's really lovely to have you here with me today. How are you doing?
I'm all right, I also want to say thank you for the opportunity, obviously, to come on and tell my story. I think you're doing some great work. And in general, as I was saying to you off recording, that I'm just in the process of, trying to trust the process and understand that everything that's coming will come. What is it? There's a saying, not every storm eventually has to run out of rain, I think is the saying. Something like that.
Yes, I like that. Well, you know what?
Yeah.
If you made that up, I like it as well. So, or
You know what it is?
it was just like turned around a little bit. I say all these quotes and I screw it up most of the time, to be fair.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying, and I think that's absolutely true. I think we do need to trust the process. Often we're just scrambling to hope that everything's going to work out, but we don't sit in the present moment enough to know that it will. So I think that's absolutely true. But I can't wait to hear your story, and I'll let you tell it, of course. But I'd really love to know your journey of, being, a young person to, adulthood, and what your experiences were to come to this place you are today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say growing up, I was quite a nerdy, shy, introverted kid that just really minded his business and wanted to do as much as he could to make his family and his mother proud, because my dad died on Christmas Day when I was 6. And I realized for a very long time when I was young, a lot of the influences that I had, I wanted to be a journalist like Trevor McDonald. He was the first ever Black news anchorman on TV, on ITV. So that was a massive, profound moment for us because we're from the same country, Trinidad and Tobago. I looked at Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and I think I was always given a lot of positive role models around me in terms of peace and equality and so much more. And I just thought I wanted to be a journalist. So when I went to school, I got involved in journalism. I did sports every now and then, but I'd often describe myself in school as the floaty poo. I wasn't cool enough for the cool kids, and I wasn't nerdy enough for the nerdy kids. I was quite a middle ground, and I think that best reflects me. I've always been in this liminal space quite often, and during school, I just really got on with things as best as I could. However, my attention would waver. I remember in school when the teachers would teach, I really struggled to keep concentration because the work was too easy. By the time the teachers had finished teaching, I had already completed the work. And I would help my other students around me, I think in a way to really, build relationships and ultimately make friends a little bit more. I think kids, we have very strange ways of trying to make friends. But I got in trouble for it. And I really dumbed myself down as time went on. I no longer wanted to be as aspirational as I once was in many different regards. Yet people would look at the things I've achieved and gone, wow, you have aspired to a lot. But sometimes I haven't given myself credit for it because I just felt like it's something, especially coming from an ethnic minority background, you're almost indebted to be. You're indebted to be excellent. You're indebted to be amazing. You're indebted to be successful. You do all these different things, especially for the sacrifices our parents have made. But I would say in adulthood is where I think, like most of us, I really came into my own, and it was as a result of a really big mental health breakdown last year. I've been on the rebuilding path, and previously before that, I never really encountered mental health in any way, shape or form. I wasn't really exposed to it except through my mum's breakdown when my dad died. But after that, there was no real conversation. So that's the best way to just answer that question, I would say.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so sorry to hear about your passing of your father on Christmas Day. That must have been incredibly difficult for the family. And I think what you're saying is quite profound in terms of being from ethnic minority. We certainly don't talk about our feelings, and it gets really bad at points. Then we start having a breakdown, or and then things need to be dealt with. But it's almost like accumulation of pain over time, isn't it? And accumulation of issues that we don't deal with or manage because we haven't been taught to process them at school, at work, with our homes, with our family. Our emotional cultures at home are very different, aren't they? I suppose, as well, especially coming from a ethnic minority background, and also, just that stigma is there, isn't it? How do you talk about stuff? It's really difficult do you feel like it was building up over time? You know, when it came to that mental health crisis, do you feel like, if you look back at it, was it building up over time, do you feel?
Yeah, when I look back at my journey, I would say for about 5 to 6 years, I was living with these very intrusive, obsessive thoughts, and I didn't talk about my thoughts to anybody because simply because the thoughts were taboo. They were what we would regard in society as shameful and disgusting. So it was building, it was pending, it was most definitely accumulating, and I realized it got to a point where I didn't even understand what anxiety was, but I couldn't stop questioning things. I couldn't stop ruminating. I couldn't stop going over things. No matter what I did, I couldn't stop. But now I look back, I realize I was anxious. I was going through anxiety, and I was going through some sort of depression. And as a result of the final intrusive thought, as a result of OCD, which is what I live with, that's when the mental health breakdown began, I would say. My world came crashing down overnight. I didn't know how I was going to make it out. I didn't know if I was going to be alive. And I'm nearly coming up to a year since it. And it's been a tumultuous journey, but I'm on a rebuilding mission. It's a real rebuilding. And in regards to the emotional cultures, I think for a lot of ethnic minority backgrounds, I said this quite often to somebody else, and my friend and I were having a conversation about this, that second generation children quite often bear the brunt of our parents having to be in survival mode, but also our parents, their weight and the expectations to know that they have not failed us as parents. So it's quite a heavy load to bear. And then also we've got the instability of the job market, the instability of the housing market. Even when I was trying to explain to my mum yesterday that it's harder now than ever to own a home. And my mum, all it is the simple solution in my mum's head is just work harder. Work hard. I'm like, people work tirelessly, work ridiculously hard, but bills have gone up as a result of today, funnily enough, while we're recording. Rail prices are going up. Inflation is going up. Interest rates are going up. It's a very different world. So I realized that a lot of the emotional culture I came from there was no conversations about emotions. It wasn't something that existed. And I'm in a place now where I'm actually a lot more emotional than I've ever been in my life, and it's been one of the most freeing feelings because my friend and I were talking about this yesterday over a meal. I just started crying, and he said he thinks I've just got a lot of years to catch up on in terms of feeling what I feel and not pretending that things don't hurt me. But that mental health breakdown was pending, and I'm now trying to really break down my own walls, essentially.
Absolutely. It's courageous to be able to do that and to be able to pick yourself up to manage it as well, because I think especially, and I've spoken to many men about their mental health and, you know, the issues around mental health stigma as well, that it's just men don't talk about it, you know, talk about their feelings, and because it's seen as kind of taboo. But we have to break that, don't we? We have to kind of come out of that cycle, because male suicide rates are going up and they're not stopping, you know, and that's what's really scary about what's going on at the moment. And I think that having voices like you will help particularly other men, other black men as well, to kind of like get that help that they need, because we're all human and we're all processing stuff, and we do it in different ways, but sometimes we need additional help. I think you spoke about depression and anxiety, which led to kind of your diagnosis for OCD, which is like, there's such a breadth of anxiety symptoms and such a breadth of depression symptoms as well. How did it follow on to OCD? Like, what was a combination of like you finding out that it was OCD?
So yeah, what's really interesting, funnily, this is a segue, is even to this day, therapists don't understand male depression. Although it's still quite a phenomenon, it's quite an emerging topic, but a lot of that relates to the job market, the rise of feminism, the way men and women now interact with the world. It's very different compared to where it once was. Men are bailing out of universities, and these sound like really right-wing talking points, but they're not. I think a lot of these conversations have a lot of placement, regardless where you sit politically. And you're right that men kill themselves, or is it over the age of 35? Suicide is the biggest killer of men. And men are more likely to be homeless. Men are more likely to be addicts to alcohol and drugs and so much more. But for myself, so I realized again I had a health anxiety. For a very long time, I was very anxious about my health. But I didn't know this was anxiety. I thought this was normal. So every time I went to the toilet, I'd be convinced that I had some sort of STI or STD. So I'd have to go and get checked. I'd cancel all my plans for that day. It became immediate urgency to me. The only way to describe it was a panic would come over me and I had to have an answer there and then. And I just learned to live with it. But then when I realized it was bad was when I paid a £300 for a same day test result from a private clinic just to prove I didn't have anything. And that's when I knew something was, I kind of realized, all right, Shaun, your behavior is not normal now. This is not okay. But I carried on. The fear migrated to HIV. That fear dissipated after a while. And then after that, I had a dream. And in this dream, I just saw the back of this white guy. And I just saw boxers. And I just woke up with this new conviction I was gay. I remember I threw up in the toilet as a result of it. And no matter what I did, I just kept looking for evidence to prove this was my newfound sexuality. That I lived with that for about 2 to 3 years, I would say, probably closer to 2 years. And then when I was with one of my friends, the sexual assault popped into my head, basically. And I had a big panic attack as a result of it. I was like, I need to see a therapist. There's something wrong with me. So I started to see a psychodynamic therapist, but psychodynamic therapy made it 100 times worse. Psychodynamic therapy, obviously, you're trying to get to the root of why you think the way that you do. But with OCD, you need CBT ERP, which is known as the gold standard. So that's cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure response prevention, which is a subtype essentially of CBT. But then the final point for me was when I had suicide thoughts and suicide images, which is the way OCD can manifest. And so obviously we have a certain idea of OCD, cleaning and symmetry, as a result of Channel 4, obsessive compulsive cleaners. You have Clo OCD, the show where the Kardashians present OCD to be this almost like comical mocking thing as well. So I had suicide thoughts and I believed the thoughts, to put it in no other way. I believed that to have a thought in my head meant that's what I was going to do. I called all my friends around and I just looked at them in the eye and I said to them, I no longer want to be alive. I said, I no longer want to be here. And depression hit me very quickly. It pretty much hit me in those very moments before I reached home, and I called all my friends and I said, please come round. And my friends didn't know what to do. I'm usually the friend in the group where everyone comes to me for support. Everybody comes to me for advice. Everyone knows me as the strong one. So you could tell that they were befuddled as to what to do, that almost Shaun's not okay. What do we do? They didn't know what to do. And over the next couple of days, I just didn't want to be alive. I was looking for ways to take my life. I wrote suicide notes. I did everything possible, but I didn't have the guts to take my life, if I was to be very honest with you. But I wanted out of the pain. There's no other way for me to put it. I wanted out of that pain. And it was on Saturday, the 4th of June. I called the NHS and I said, I need help. I believe I have OCD. Because I typed in, why am I having certain thoughts? But I don't want to act on them. And OCD, obsessive, intrusive thoughts all popped up. And I was like, this is what I've got. I knew this is what I had. And when I look back at the IAPT service letters, they said that I had symptoms of OCD. But this is how you know, for years, I wasn't in a place where I was really registering what was going on. I wasn't absorbing what was going on in my world. So I called the NHS and I said, please, I need help. They said they can't help me. I've been on the waiting list for about a year at that point. So I was on the waiting list for a very long time. And they suggested a book to me called Break Free from OCD. But when you're in the height of a mental health breakdown, you can't absorb anything. You're barely surviving. Yeah, the last thing you want to do is read. And I went on via the internet. And I found this woman called Emma Garrick. And I just begged her for a phone call. And we spoke and I just cried my absolute eyes out. I said, am I a bad person? I said, why am I having these kind of thoughts? What's wrong with me? She said, sure, you have OCD. And I said, how do you know? She has a lived experience of it. She's a therapist, obviously. And therapy began on Monday, and I've been in recovery ever since. She saved my life, and I truly don't know what would have happened if she wasn't around during that time. I don't know what would have happened. I was in a really bad place. I could barely eat. I was struggling to sleep. And it's cyclical. When you're anxious and you struggle to sleep, you become more anxious. Suicidal ideation can get higher and so much more. But yeah, that's the best way to describe what's happened for me so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's so heartbreaking to hear what you've been through and that you were in such pain as well. But having someone to be there for you and manage you through it must have been such relief. And And, it's interesting you said about the first type of therapy, the psychodynamic therapy, didn't really help. It made it worse. How would you, thing is, how could you determine what works for you, what doesn't work for you? Do you know what I mean? It's like, because there's so many different types of therapy. Like, how could you assess what's going good for you, what's not going good for you, do you think?
So obviously in regards to OCD, CBT, ERP, with ideally ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, is known as the gold standard for OCD. It's got a very high succession rates and it helps to give people back their lives. When you look at other types of therapy, I suppose if you want the answer as to what kind of therapy works for people, I think it's a therapy that challenges you, but also ultimately allows you to be the better version of yourself. Ideally, I would argue that a therapist's job is to help you enough that you can go on in life and use those tools that you've learned in therapy, put them in your tool belt and not have to come back. You may have to come back at some point. I believe we all do. But for me, when I realized it wasn't working, I felt worse after every single session. And it wasn't a temporary sadness or a dullness. It was constant. I knew it was not helping me, but I did not have the boundaries and the language to articulate necessarily how I felt. My mind was already a minefield, essentially, with different traps that were being set off. And I couldn't figure out whether was it the food I was eating? Was it the therapist? Was it the lack of sleep? Was it the anxiety? I couldn't figure it out. But then what I realized was when I started the therapy for OCD specifically with my other therapist, that's when things started to align. I felt bad for a bit, but in moments I started to feel better because I was doing the work that my brain essentially needed. So that's what I would say is the best way to describe it. But you're right in some essences that some people question whether it works for them. But then some people, when they feel bad, they give up really quickly. I went on with it for weeks.
Yeah.
So obviously I think it's down to your own emotional endurance, what you can, go along with as well. But ultimately, I think you better than anybody else.
Absolutely. It's so true. And I think that you have to sort of understand what's working for you. And if it's not working for you after a period of time, then, it's time to change it as well. And not be afraid to ask and do some more research yourself as well, because it's hard to get that support through the NHS anyway. But I think OCD is such a misunderstood, now I'm speaking to you, it feels like a really misunderstood disorder. And, for most people, it would be like, you're obsessively washing your hands or, putting your shoes in certain orders and that sort of stuff as well. But it's so much deeper rooted than that, isn't it, as well? How could you describe OCD at its essence? Like what if someone was thinking, I have OCD, what kind of symptoms or would they be experiencing, do you think? Or is it so varied that you can't really narrow it down?
So there are some common symptoms, such as, and I use this example for anybody. If you go by a bridge, and everybody sometimes gets an intrusive thought. There's studies that show everybody gets an intrusive thought. The only people that don't get intrusive thoughts are people who are no longer alive on this earth. You go by the bridge and you look over the bridge and you're like, what happens if I jump? But you might be able to dismiss that. You might be able to just bat that away and realize, it doesn't mean anything. Someone with OCD, suicide OCD as an example, which is a subcategory of OCD, they would sit there and ruminate over and over and over again, thinking, what does this mean? Does this mean I'm going to take my life? I don't want to do it. Am I going to do it? And they'll become afraid of going near that bridge. So what OCD does is it makes your world smaller because your brain is trying to protect you by throwing these thoughts out at you. So that's why it's a brain disorder. But another way to describe OCD is like, it's almost as if you're living with your worst possible fears on a hamster wheel, running through your mind all the time. Obsessive. It's cyclical. It goes around and around and around. So when I was questioning my sexuality, it would go from, I think that guy's good looking. Does that mean I'm gay? But wait, what's my type? Would he still be my type? What's going on? Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? It was endless. It was an endless search. And we know, obviously, with anxiety, it's like sitting in a rocking chair and expecting to go forward. You don't go anywhere. You're still in that same spot over and over again. But it's the endless rumination. It's anxiety almost on steroids. It's the panic attacks. It's the anxiety attacks. It's the depersonalization and derealization. And for anybody who's not sure what that is, it's where you don't feel connected to your world. You lose sense of reality, taste, touch. You just question everything. And that's what happens typically when your brain is overwhelmed. So that's how I would describe OCD, and it's characterized by, as I said, intrusive, repetitive, obsessive, unwanted, intrusive thoughts.
Yeah. And I think that, like you said, that people do misconstrue what OCD means as well. But also it sounds like, like if you have OCD, then it can contribute to anxiety. It can contribute to depression as well, right? So other things surface from it as well. So did you have to deal with all those three things together as well?
Yeah, and again, that's a fantastic question, because you can have OCD without the anxiety and you can have OCD without the depression. That's why often when I'd say you've recovered from OCD or you're recovering from OCD. But what makes obviously OCD is the anxiety around the thoughts. You avoid certain things because you don't want to have certain thoughts. And the depression that can become as a result of certain thoughts is sometimes can be quite inevitable. And we know that people that live with OCD are more likely to become suicidal. They're more likely to become depressed as a result of the thoughts, because the thoughts are ego dystonic, which means they are against your morals and values. They don't align with who you are as a person. But for somebody with OCD, we think they say something about us, but it doesn't. The brain is a storytelling machine. It carves stories. It weaves narratives. You cannot believe every story that's in your brain. So for someone with OCD, they're buying hook, line, and sinker into every story that happens in their mind without realizing that your brain can create junk thoughts. Your brain can create a wide array of thoughts. So that's, again, how it's the easiest way for me to describe it to people. And we trivialize OCD, as I said, because of shows such as Obsessive Compulsive Cleaners. The view in society, as you said, is about cleaning and symmetry. But that's one way that OCD can manifest. So that's quite typically contamination OCD is the fear that everything is contaminated. So people can end up having eating disorders as a result of that. People can end up not wanting to order anything out from outside. People sometimes don't even leave their room. It's no joke. And it's an anxiety/based compulsive disorder. It's repetitive. It's your brain trying to protect you. But we know the brain is faulty at times. So I think if we have a deeper understanding of what OCD is, we can get more research to help people, but also we can actually get people more help that they actually need. There's so many people out there that live with OCD, but OCD is not a joke as much as people think it is. It's not this laughing matter. OCD takes lives. OCD leaves people depressed and suicidal. And there's specialist units in hospitals as a result of severe OCD.
And I'm sure it's under-resourced as well. And people have waiting lists. I think, it's and also people not realizing that people sort of live in that pain that they have, and I'm sure, like, can you imagine previous generations living with OCD as well, and the impact that it's had. And I know there's a lot more work to be done. And that's why it's so inspiring to meet someone like you, who's trying to, even though you were diagnosed so recently, trying to turn that, that pain into passion for helping others. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, maybe it could give you more placement as to why I decided to help people. So I remember I was still seeing my therapist. I was still in the throes of depression. And I was having all these fears and thoughts that I was schizophrenic, BPD. I was diagnosing myself, as you quite typically will do with anxiety. You try to always find different answers. And I just woke up and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go and change the world. And I walked downstairs, opened up my Google, my laptop, and I just opened up Google Documents and I just started writing my story. And it was in August I released my story, and so many people reached out to me, friends, family, people I had interacted with on the internet said, Shaun, I have OCD as well. And I was like, what? I thought I was the only one, or especially the only black guy with OCD, but I've made so many beautiful friendships as a result of OCD. And currently what I'm doing at the moment, I'm going to be delivering on the 28th of April my third TED Talk about psychedelics and the potential mental health revolution it's going to bring. I've applied for a job to work. Thank you so much. I've applied for a job to work in the specialist services with OCD because they're looking for people with lived experience. Because people in OCD wards need inspiration. They need to know they can get their life back. And that's really important to me. I want to work on becoming an author. I'm training at the moment to be a life coach. I want to go on to become a therapist at some point. I really want to just have the skills to help other people. So that's some of the work that I'm doing. I'm still doing my journalism, telling my story, reporting on things that I think actually matter, which is really exciting because I wake up and no day's ever the same. So I'm always discovering something new about myself. I'm very much just in self-discovery mode, really and truly. But my future, I would like to believe, is bright, even when I'm uncertain about things. But I think there's a lot of exciting things that I've got coming, and I think the one thing I really do want to have is a practice. I want to have a practice where people can come and they can get the help that they need, because way too many people don't get the help that they need. And as you mentioned, NHS waiting times are criminally ridiculous. It's underfunded. And for example, statistically speaking, 89p is spent on per patient with OCD for research, compared to when you look at cancer, which has, I think, £8 and depression, which has about £8 and so much more. So we need more research around OCD. I was recently on a trial with Imperial College London looking into psychedelics, so looking into magic mushrooms and psilocybin being a psychoactive ingredient in magic mushrooms to see how it alleviates OCD symptoms. So that was quite exciting. So I'm going to be doing a lot of research. I'm going to be doing a lot of dissemination of information to give people hope, I would say.
Yeah, I think I love that you touched on psychedelics. I think there was a program on Netflix. I can't remember what it was called now, but it was on psychedelics.
How to change your mind on plants.
That's it. Yeah, that's the one. And also, I think I've mentioned Gabon Mate in every single podcast. He's the main man though, when it comes to psychedelics as well. But he's done a lot of work on psychedelics and treat people in North America. But it's been quite incredible what I've seen and how psychedelics can really help people. I think it's more advanced in North America. I think we've got a way to go. But I'm really excited to hear that you're going to be doing this in the UK as well and doing that research. It's amazing. It really is. So something we felt something was so bad, and so bad for you, which it can be if it's done. Anything's bad for you if it's done, uncontrolled and that sort of stuff as well. But really, how it can, get deep into your consciousness and be able to help you process stuff, which is incredible. Especially like is it? I can't even pronounce it. Is it Sibyllin?
Psilocybin.
Psilocybin, that's the one, yeah. Is that the same as magic mushrooms? Or
that's the psychoactive ingredient in magic mushrooms. So that's the ingredient that essentially makes you trip. That's the best way to explain it to people. The way it interacts with the brain can cause you to trip. But there is really exciting research, looking into MDMA, ketamine. One of my friends has been on a ketamine trial in America, and she's into neuroscience, and that's helped her work with her OCD as well. So you're right that a lot of our views are stagnant when it comes to psychedelics, simply because of a lot of it's religion, and religion ultimately affects culture. We demonize any altered states of consciousness. And, you look at Richard Nixon and his war on drugs, and that stopped a lot of research on psychedelics. But there was a 2006 Harvard study that was done that showed psilocybin, again, has great effects on OCD. And there's more research that's come out showing that psilocybin helps people with depression and anxiety. So when we look at the current mental health crisis, mental health anxiety and depression are on the rise. Antidepressant usage is on the rise. Antidepressants they have their place in society, but quite often people don't realize that depression sometimes, yes, there can be something chemically in your brain that can go wrong. But what about the factors around it that can cause the depression? Do we need to look at people's lives and look at the way we facilitate their purpose, the things that they do in life, before giving people antidepressants? So that's another big issue. Antidepressants are ruining our oceans. There's a lot of big issues with the amount that we're consuming. And some people would argue that at the root of depression is a lack of connection with people and yourself. Correct. Most importantly, we live in such a hustle-driven society where we're forced to produce that we no longer really have time to really look at who we are within. So what psychedelics quite often do is they're not going to heal. They give you the stepping stones to figure out what's going on within you. And that's what psychedelics have done for me personally.
It's amazing. I think if it came through and the research and it's more readily available to people, I think that would be, life-changing for lots of people. For sure. And I think you're absolutely spot on about not realizing, we live in such a culture that we compare ourselves to each other. We are worried about, how good we are, how successful we are, what we're doing. But actually, we don't stop and think about, like you said, what's our purpose? What are our values? And certainly when I'm coaching or leadership coaching, my approach is very holistic. I want to be able to get into someone's self-awareness, someone's emotions as well, to be able to help them to process stuff as well, And I think that's super important. And I think we don't learn it. We don't learn it anywhere. We don't learn about these things. And so it builds up, and we get to adulthood. We end up in a therapist chair because we haven't been able to process all the stuff that we've been feeling for so long, and I feel scared and frightened for the younger generations coming up as well, because it feels like things still aren't changing fast enough for us to be able to help our young people, to provide them with the resilience, the skills to kind of live really fulfilled lives,
Absolutely. In your practice with leadership, what do you find has been one of the most common themes that pop up for you in regards to why people come to you for leadership?
Honestly, when people come to me on a one-to-one basis, they are confused about their life, about where they want to go, why they've chosen a certain career, that they have self-limiting beliefs they're not good enough to do that career as well. So they have feelings of the inner critic or imposter syndrome, as well, feeling they don't know their purpose. They just fell into a job because they happen to do a degree in that area, as well. And honestly, like, your life changes as you get older, right? As well. So, but we feel like we have to be successful as soon as we come out of university and like do all the things. But the thing is, we are beings that are able to do many things, and we have many talents as well, not just focus on one thing. And I think helping people realize that you have other things that you can do with your life. You can actually expand in different ways, is really empowering, I think, to people.
For sure. And this is one thing I learned in training to be a life coach is I've got a lot of self-limiting beliefs. I quite often have told myself stories based on the stories I've seen with other people. And I've written a whole essay in my mind about why I can't do this and why I can't do that. So it's a beautiful thing. And I'm sure, like, within your practice, that you believe in people's ability to be better than what they are, but it's not that they're not good enough. It's they have the potential to be whatever they can be.
Absolutely. It's unlocking that potential, basically. Everyone has the answers. Everyone has the potential as human beings. But we limit ourselves by our families, our culture, our society of right and wrong, and that sort of stuff. And that's what drives people into a lot of pain. And I think I can relate to you helping people with their pain, because I've probably been through the similar sorts of things, with my own pain, and being able to help others as well. And I think we need more of you, for sure, to kind of like help break the stigma, help other people. And I think you'd be an incredible life coach and therapist, to kind of be, your passion is so much there. And I think that, it's beautiful to see someone also from ethnic minority background to kind of help other people, because there's not enough of us either, I don't think, to kind of like put the word out there and help our own communities, as well, because there's such a stigma that we need to break. It's even harder with our communities, I think, as well.
Absolutely. And even life coaching is let's call a spade a spade. It's a very middle class profession, essentially. The courses are very expensive, so it's not a cash that sometimes people have lying around, and that can also prevent access to having the ability to really reach a higher height in regards to your potential. And in terms of being from the background I'm from, one thing I've learned to realize is I looked at a lot of the issues that were going on in my community, and just in general, a lot of the other communities that I can relate to in so many ways. And I decided I could either continue to complain about the problem, or I could try and provide a solution. And this is just my version of my solution, right? I'm not going to be perfect. And one thing I was reading up on yesterday was ethical leadership, which is something that's been very important to me, to realize I'm doing something for the greater good, not just for myself. I'm responsible to other
Absolutely.
people. That's something that's been a very profound moment of learning for me. And I'm sure you've realized again that the more you read, the more you find out, is the more you come to this humbling, sobering reality that you know nothing at all.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. There's a lot to learn. And that's why I think I was terrible at school. I didn't really study, got bored quite easily, just about passed my A levels. Managed to get a degree. But I think, I'm willingly going into this MSc because I really want to learn. I really want to dig into stuff. And I learn by working, I suppose. I've always learned by working. But reading is just opened my mind to so many different things. It's just, I have like 10 different books now that I want to dive into, and I skim through it and I get really excited about it. But you learn so much, and I can't wait to apply, more knowledge to what I'm doing, because I'm excited to help people even more, because I still think there's so much research to be done, so much more to be done to help people. We had mental institutions, we still do. In the 1960s, onwards, 1950s onwards, people were stuck in these institutions because no one else was doing them, just gave them tablets to sedate them. It just blows my mind. That wasn't very long ago, that we did that to people. It blows my mind. It really does. So it feels like we do have a lot of work to do, but I feel like we are also heading in the right direction by talking about these things and helping people as well, In terms of your journey and your hopes, what are your aspirations and stuff like going forwards? Like, I know you want to be a coach and perhaps a therapist. Like, are you actively, freelancing at the moment? Like, what are you up to currently? And is it helping you with the future, I suppose?
So yeah, I do a lot of mental health advocacy. I do a lot of public speaking, the freelance journalism, just really trying to use my platform in the best ways that I know how. And the audience I have, I'm quite lucky from doing years of modeling and acting before that. I want to even move into the voiceover world / radio at some point. I think we need different opinions and new voices on the airways before maybe a certain age. I'm thinking about that. That's something else I'm thinking about. But at the moment, it's a lot of freelancing work. But as I said, I've been applying for a lot of jobs where I think my skill set and my lived experience can be of massive benefit. So the specialist services for OCD and CAMS and deaf adults is somewhere where I would like to ideally be as well. The only thing that worries me is the bureaucracy and the red tape around things. But I understand that's part of the negotiation. That's one thing I've realized as part of the negotiation. But I want to put together a series of inspirational / motivational talks that aren't just cliche for people that live with mental illness and especially OCD. Because as I said previously, too many people with OCD, when you look at support groups, so many support groups can be quite a negative, depressing place without giving people the tools and not the reassurance, but the belief that they can get better and they can still live in spite of OCD. So this is something else that I really want to do. I want to change certain conversations. I really want to open up narratives to get people to understand that there's so much more. There's so much more.
Absolutely. It's just kind of like thinking out of the box, isn't it? It's thinking differently as well. It's thinking with diverse voices and diverse thoughts on topics, right? And that gets people thinking. I think we just think the same thing again and again because we're showing the same thing again and again on social media or the news or whatever it is as well. So I love that. I love that you're going to do that. How can people contact you if they'd like to kind of speak to you more about OCD and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, you'll probably in your show notes, you'll put a lot of links to what I'm doing, but you can find me on all social media at the Shaun Flores, so TheShaunFlores. And my DMs are pretty much open. I'm honestly willing to have a conversation with pretty much any and everybody because I believe conversations are the first step that we ever need to be able to, help this world that we live in. I often say that sharing your story is a burden half, but sharing your story is somebody else's healing because they feel seen. And that's one of the biggest themes I've realized by talking. I get messages all the time about people just go, thank you, man. I feel seen. Finally, I'm not the only one. So yeah, find me on all social media. My as I said, my DMs again are open and you're going to see a lot more of my work. So just type in my name, Shaun Flores, on the internet, and a lot of my stuff will come up.
Don't forget me when you're famous then, in that case.
You know what it is? I have no desire for fame. I only have desire for legacy, a meaningful legacy, Because money...
I love that. That's it. That's it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, legacy is way more important to me than money.
I need that legacy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
100%, 100%. No, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And I have one last question before I let you leave me for the afternoon. That is, how do you find the power within you to manage your mental health now and for the future?
There's a saying by Carl Jung that says a tree cannot reach up to heaven unless its roots are down in hell. And I quite often have realized I've lived in hell before, so now I decide to try and make heaven out of what I do have. And that's how I've been able to find the power within me, but also understanding that I had to go through some sort of hardship to be where I am now. As much as I don't wish a mental breakdown on anybody, the mental breakdown taught me a serious amount about myself, my capacity and my propensity to endure, to keep going. And there's another saying in psychology, which is PTG, which is post-traumatic growth. So through your trauma, you can grow, worse, or you can grow better. And I choose to grow better every single day. I choose to try and be self-aware. I choose to be, insightful. But I know it's not easy, but I'm trying to make choices to keep figuring out that power within myself. So that's how I would say I practice it, by knowing I've been at my worst. It cannot get worse than that. It's time to get back up.
Yeah, I love that. That's a beautiful thing to say, a beautiful quote as well, and so true. Shaun, thank you so much for sharing your journey with me and with the world as well. You're very inspirational, and I wish you all the best. I think you're going to do amazing things. I can't wait to see what happens next.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.